The file reached Patton with one page missing, one guard suddenly transferred, and one German prisoner removed from the infirmary before sunrise, while the officers at the camp kept repeating that nothing unusual had happened, even as fresh boot marks led from the barracks to a locked shed that no inspector had been allowed to open. And by noon, the general was on the road with orders that no one inside the wire should be warned. The trouble began when a young clerk at the camp office carried the morning report across the yard and noticed that the prisoner count had been changed with a darker pencil, leaving 3 numbers written over older marks that still showed through the paper. He brought the report to Captain Harlan, the officer in charge, but Harlan folded it before the clerk finished speaking and told him to copy the new count into the clean ledger before the visiting inspector arrived from division headquarters. At the North Barracks, German prisoners were ordered into line for roll call, and one man named Ernst Keller stepped forward with a bandage under his sleeve, asking in broken English why his bunkmate had not returned from the infirmary during the night. The sergeant on duty pushed Keller back into line with the flat of his hand and ordered the interpreter to translate only the official answer, which said the missing prisoner had been moved for medical observation and would return when cleared. Keller did not argue, but he pulled a folded laundry tag from his pocket and handed it to another prisoner, because the tag carried the missing man's name and had been found near the tool shed instead of the medical hut. Before noon, a Red Cross parcel truck stopped outside the gate, and 2 civilian women stepped down with boxes of books, socks, soap, and paper, but the guard captain delayed their entry while soldiers hurried across the yard carrying blankets from the closed shed. One of the women saw dark stains on a blanket before it was thrown into the laundry cart, and she wrote the detail in the margin of her delivery form, marking the time beside it in small, careful letters. Inside the office, Captain Harlan ordered the clerk to remove the infirmary sheet from the file and replace it with a typed transfer notice, but the typewriter ribbon was nearly dry, and the fresh notice came out pale against the older pages. The clerk placed the original sheet under a blotter instead of burning it, because the name on the paper matched the laundry tag Keller had passed through the barracks, and the listed injury did not match a normal medical transfer. That evening, a driver from 3rd Army Headquarters arrived with a sealed request for camp records, and Harlan sent back only the clean ledger, the typed notice, and a short note saying camp discipline was steady and all prisoner complaints had been resolved. The clerk watched the driver leave, then slipped the hidden infirmary sheet into a supply envelope addressed to a chaplain who regularly traveled between camps, knowing it was the only route that might pass above Harlan's desk. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. The chaplain received the supply envelope at dawn, and when he opened it beside his jeep, he found the infirmary sheet folded around a laundry tag, with a penciled note saying the man on the page had never entered the medical hut. He drove first to the chapel tent and asked 2 orderlies about the missing prisoner, but both men looked toward the office before answering, and one quietly pointed toward the old coal room behind the mess hall. When the chaplain reached the coal room, he found fresh straw spread across the floor, a broken pair of spectacles under a crate, and a narrow line of dried blood leading toward the rear door, where the ground had been scraped flat with a shovel. Captain Harlan arrived before the chaplain could leave and said the room had been used for drunk American soldiers, not prisoners, then ordered 2 guards to seal it until a sanitation detail could clear the waste. The chaplain did not confront him again, but he drove straight to the nearest signal office and sent a coded complaint to headquarters, naming the missing prisoner, the false transfer notice, and the officer who had blocked access to the coal room. By the next afternoon, Harlan had learned that a message had gone out, and he reacted by moving Keller and 6 other German prisoners to a work truck bound for a remote repair site beyond the main camp road. The truck did not reach the repair site because military police stopped it at a bridge checkpoint after noticing that the prisoner list carried no medical clearance and no destination stamp from the labor office. Keller was pulled from the truck and searched, and the laundry tag was gone, but a second prisoner had hidden a small chapel card in his boot with the missing man's name written inside by the clerk. At headquarters, the coded complaint landed on a colonel's desk, and the colonel sent a polite inquiry back to Harlan instead of alerting Patton, because he wanted the matter handled quietly before it became a scandal. Harlan answered with a longer report accusing Keller of spreading false rumors, accusing the chaplain of misunderstanding camp discipline, and claiming the missing prisoner had attempted escape during a medical transfer. The colonel accepted the explanation at first, but when the bridge checkpoint report arrived with the illegal work truck entry, the papers no longer fit together, and the file was moved from routine correspondence to restricted command review. That night, Patton's aide found the review packet waiting beneath a stack of fuel reports, and the missing infirmary sheet carried one note in red pencil that changed everything, because the time of the injury was 6 hours before the claimed escape. Patton did not receive the full packet until the next morning, and by then Harlan had already begun moving witnesses out of reach, sending the clerk to a supply depot, the 2 orderlies to an ambulance convoy, and the coal room guards to separate posts. The first consequence came before Patton entered the camp, when an ambulance from the rear hospital returned with the missing prisoner still alive, wrapped in a blanket, unable to stand, and listed under a false name on the driver's manifest. The hospital driver refused to leave the gate until someone signed for the man, and his refusal forced the gate sergeant to call the office, where Harlan tried to send the ambulance away through a side road. A military policeman at the gate heard the order, copied the false name from the manifest, and compared it with the restricted alert sent overnight from headquarters, then blocked the ambulance with his jeep before it could turn. Prisoners in the nearby barracks saw the stretcher carried inside the infirmary, and Keller struck the wooden wall with a tin cup to spread the signal, bringing men to the windows before the guards could close the shutters. The camp commander ordered all barracks locked, but the sudden lock-in caused the morning kitchen detail to halt, the bakery ovens to burn through the first bread, and the civilian delivery crew to wait outside with fresh supplies that could no longer be unloaded. A local sheriff arrived because the delivery crew had reported the blocked gate, and Harlan tried to keep him at the road, but the sheriff had already seen the ambulance and asked why a prisoner under a false name was being hidden in an army camp. The argument pulled more officers toward the entrance, and during the confusion, the young clerk returned from the supply depot under escort, carrying carbon copies of 3 erased reports he had taken from the office wastebasket. The copies showed that the missing prisoner had been questioned in the coal room after accusing 2 guards of stealing Red Cross goods, and the injury report had been rewritten twice before the false escape story appeared. When Patton's car finally reached the gate, the camp was no longer quiet enough to bury the matter, because the sheriff's notes, the ambulance manifest, the clerk's copies, and the prisoners locked in the barracks had turned one hidden beating into a command failure. Patton stepped from the car without greeting Harlan, took the manifest from the military policeman, read the false name, then ordered the gate opened to his inspection party and placed Harlan under temporary restriction until every locked room was searched. The reversal began when Patton entered the office expecting to question prisoners first, but the first man he ordered into the room was not German at all, because he called for the American supply sergeant who controlled every Red Cross crate entering the camp. The sergeant brought his keys with shaking hands, and Patton ordered him to unlock the storage cage, where inspectors found missing cigarettes, chocolate bars, coffee tins, and letters that had been taken from parcels before distribution. Captain Harlan tried to shift blame onto the prisoners, claiming they had traded goods and invented charges after discipline tightened. But the clerk placed the carbon copies on the desk and pointed to Harlan's initials on each rewritten report. Patton then ordered the coal room opened in front of American officers, military police, the chaplain, and the civilian women from the aid truck, making the lock shed a public inspection site instead of a hidden corner of the camp. Under the straw, the search party found a torn sleeve, a broken belt buckle, and a Red Cross label with the missing prisoner's number, and the chaplain identified the spectacles he had seen the day before under the crate. The major reversal came when Keller was brought from the locked barracks to accuse no one, because instead of speaking against the guards, he handed Patton a list of German prisoners who had received extra food from the stolen parcels in exchange for informing on their own barracks. That list turned the case away from a simple guard abuse scandal and exposed a second system inside the wire, where selected prisoners had helped silence complaints by naming troublemakers before inspections. Patton ordered the informers separated from the barracks, not as punishment, but to prevent the prisoners from attacking them, and the German compound erupted when men realized that some of their own had helped hide the missing prisoners' injuries. Harlan's confidence collapsed when one informer agreed to talk after seeing military police surround the office, and he admitted that guards had promised him early transfer if he identified prisoners who complained about stolen parcels and rough treatment. Patton did not shout across the yard, but he gave orders that changed the camp within minutes, removing the supply sergeant, replacing the gate guards, opening the parcel records, and sending an urgent report above the colonel who had tried to keep the matter quiet. By sunset, the prisoners were not the only ones under guard, because American soldiers now stood outside the office, the storage cage, the infirmary, and Harlan's quarters, while Patton's aides wrote sworn statements from every man who had touched the file. The final break came before dawn, when the injured prisoner woke long enough to identify the guard who had struck him, but the infirmary doctor warned that the man could not travel, which meant the case could no longer be moved cleanly to another post. Patton ordered a court inquiry held inside the camp chapel, not as a full trial, but as an emergency command hearing, and every officer who had signed a false page was required to sit in the front row while the stolen parcels were stacked beside the altar rail. The first witness was the hospital driver, who explained how he had been told to return the prisoner under a false name, and his testimony fixed the route, the time, and the officer who had ordered the deception. The civilian aid worker followed with her delivery form, showing the note about stained blankets, and when the form matched the laundry records, Harlan could no longer claim that outsiders had confused ordinary camp movement with misconduct. The informers were brought in under military police protection, and one of them named the guard who had taken Keller's bunkmate to the coal room, then named the supply sergeant who had paid prisoners with stolen coffee and cigarettes. A German prisoner shouted from the back of the chapel, and the military police moved to stop a fight, but Patton ordered the room cleared row by row instead of allowing the hearing to become a riot that could destroy the testimony. Outside, prisoners were sent to separate compounds by barracks number, and American guards were reassigned under new officers, cutting the old chain of control before the men who had hidden the truth could warn each other. The irreversible event came when Patton signed an order removing Captain Harlan from command, confining the accused guards, freezing the camp records, and transferring the investigation beyond the colonel who had tried to soften the first complaint. A sealed dispatch left the camp by motorcycle courier before noon, carrying sworn statements, parcel logs, medical records, and the false transfer notice, making the cover-up impossible to pull back into private hands. By evening, the missing prisoner's real name was restored to the infirmary board. Keller was moved out of danger, the stolen parcels were inventoried in public, and every prisoner saw that the men who had controlled the files no longer controlled the gates. When Patton left after dark, the camp did not return to normal because new orders had locked the truth into military channels, and the officers who once hid behind clean reports now faced a record that could not be erased. The next morning, the chapel table was carried into the yard and used as a claims desk for every prisoner whose parcel had been opened or stolen. Keller watched the first box handed back with its label corrected, then saw the injured man's name written properly on the camp board. No speech followed. The new commander simply nailed Patton's order beside the gate, where guards and prisoners had to pass it all day, and the missing page was no longer missing. When the clerk placed the original infirmary sheet into the locked evidence pouch, The case finally left the camp with a number, a witness list, and no room for another clean report. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more untold WW2 stories.